Stories from around the corner.
And around the country.
You're listening to All the Best.
Proudly supported by the Art Gallery of New South Wales.
You're listening to All the Best from FBI Radio 94.5. I'm Gabriella Accaria. This week, we explore the psychological impact of displacement. But before we get into this week's story, I want to acknowledge that I'm recording from stolen and Gadigal land and pay my respect to Gadigal elders past and present, and also recognise that the area where FBI Radio is situated, Redfern, has long been a place of storytelling, strength, resistance, and resilience for First Nations communities. Have you ever felt like you're a ghost between two worlds? Living in between places of conflict and a place of diaspora, you still feel drawn to your homeland. It's yours to saunter in, and you feel like you can be at one there. Yet, in war-torn contexts, you cannot exist within it with ease. Here is Alissar, who is currently in Lebanon.
I'm recording this in Lebanon as we enter the second month of this brutal war. Currently, 1 million people have been displaced due to evacuation orders of entire villages and regions by the Israeli forces, who have also begun an invasion in the southern part of the country. At this point, over 1,000 people have been killed. It feels like history repeating, honestly, even though I've never witnessed this number of internally displaced people before. We always knew that this was a possibility. I hope this story highlights those themes in a way, and I hope you continue fighting with us against imperialism and the dehumanization of my people.
That was Alissar speaking. Content warning. This story contains depictions of war, displacement, and racism, mentions of sexual violence, and a swear word.
Don't talk about the water. When I was growing up, Baba always said we came from peasants, which is an absurd thing to hear when you're a child and want nice things. Such an old-fashioned term. Peasants, translated by Baba from Arabic to French to English, but it was like he'd learned it from the Templars. I came to appreciate his meaning, though, many years later, when I felt that I could live alone forever next to the soft green sea. I'd been there for almost 4 months, staying in my parents' empty house on indefinite personal leave. I used water saved from washing up to flush the toilet. I repaired the gas hose in the oven. I turned milk powder into yogurt. After discovering that ants had a taste for the blood trickling down my thighs, I sewed strips of towel into my underpants. I baked coconut macarons to trade for mangoes the length of my middle finger and date syrup that one of the nearby construction workers poured into jars from a dusty old jerry can. I was only supposed to return home for a quick visit, but my parents had to leave suddenly soon after my arrival to treat Mama's illness at a clinic in Greece. Bewildered by the state of my village and the changes to my parents' faces, I felt physically incapable of flying away again alone. And for what? The cold rooms I'd found in diaspora? No. I started sketching on walks every evening to avoid emails from my manager. I'd never drawn water before, and the body, colour, texture, negative space, they all eluded me. The last time I practiced drawing was when I went to art school in Vienna. I remember the first day of semester where we paired up with a classmate and sketched their portrait while asking scripted questions. Who is one artist from your country that influenced you? What was the first thing you ever made that you thought of as art? It was a kind of icebreaker exercise, less about the portrait itself than about getting to know one another. After 20 minutes or so, we went around the room and presented our drawings to the group, along with whatever facts we'd learned about our partners. I went first, and then my partner, a blonde woman, told the class my name and held up her drawing of a gorilla. She turned her back to me and addressed the professor with an affected laugh. "Because all Arabs are gorillas," she said sweetly. Then she looked at whatever I was doing with my face and hissed under her breath, No, it's not so personal." "You're very pretty," the professor told me, pulling me aside afterwards. "But some people in this country will refuse to see it." The first few weeks of semester blurred together, but at some point, I learned that the blonde woman had switched majors and wouldn't be in any more of my classes. Apart from the brief exchange with the professor, nobody ever said a word about the incident. "Delete that off your phone right now," my sister yelled after I showed her a photo of the portrait, which I found myself secretly staring at every now and again. Before this, I'd never given much thought to human-animal hybrids. I vaguely remember drawing mermaids and girls with wings when I was much younger, blushing, frothy things, holding wands and jewels, tiaras in their long blonde hair. It was so hot. The beach could bring relief only after 4 or 5 in the afternoon. Go out any earlier and you'd get caught in lukewarm puddles of low tide that felt greasy and wrong. There was bad news everywhere, seemingly overnight. Drones appeared over the sea, and dark vessels menaced the horizon while exploring its depths. The internet, phone lines, and electricity were shut off for days at a time with no warning. Fishing boats started disappearing without a trace. I would have struggled to continue living there if it hadn't been for my neighbor, a refugee from Syria, who gave me a power bank for my phone and made food with me on the weekend. Some days there was nothing to do except stare at the silent face of the air conditioner with sweat streaming into my eyes. There was often a cool breeze in the evenings, but living alone while there was so much unrest, I was hesitant to sleep outside or leave the balcony door open at night. I walked around the house writing poems, or sat in darkness on the balcony, talking to my parents and friends whenever I could. For as long as I could remember, Mama kept old bomb casings as flower pots and filled them with soil from her village, a pebbly, fawn-coloured clay that grew geraniums, nana, and other herbs. I trickled my rations of clean water on them after sunset. One night, I was chatting to an old friend who'd helped me with English during high school, and he told me, "You're still what you always were. Not so much a fish out of water as a beached whale." My neighbor arrived every Saturday morning, laden with bags of rice, cheese, and vegetables. There was nothing she couldn't cook. Kibbe any way you like, falafel, knefi b'jibin, enormous round trays of svoof that I imagine Mama would happily trade for any of her 5 children. During these early days of our friendship, I only attempted to contribute one dish to the sufra. dessert of baked apples and dates smothered in homemade cream. She blanched when I placed it before her. "Cooked apples remind me of Germany. I can't," she said, her eyes uneasy. I never dared make anything for her again. We'd sit out on the balcony after cleaning up, usually sharing a bowl of figs or cherries from the mountains, the sky covering us in gold and shadows. The light pushed into the sea and vanished, and the hawks, sparrows, and bees vanished with it. Other creatures emerged, scorpions and spiders and faceless men. I had a defense strategy for encountering each of them, involving Baba's heavy boots and the pepper spray I'd hidden around the house. And in the case of more desperate scenarios, I planned to climb onto the roof and then, courage permitting, leap off. "If a man ever catches me again, I'm going to shit all over myself," my neighbor told me. We spoke about these things, like all women do, but we were also women who were children of war, 1 minute lost in despair, the next collapsing in laughter. "My friend did that, ruined her only pair of panties. My friend, my lost friend." People would be horrified to hear us. We'd talk into the night until her husband picked her up, long after she finished her evening prayers. He'd pull into the driveway quietly, flashing the high beams until she saw them and went downstairs. I watched her nervously adjust her hijab as I divided up the food, and she'd insist, No, keep it for yourself, look how skinny you are." Each time, I waved from the top of the stairs at her husband, his first wife in the front seat. They never waved back, but nodded with an air of apologetic tolerance, the kind you'd show a beggar on the street. My parents had urged me countless times to stay away from our village, which they felt could go up in flames at any moment. Before I came back home, I thought I was just a few good sleeps away from permanently settling down abroad. I thought that, like my peers, I would grow into the shape of Western routine, with its unbearable loneliness and sore eyes and shoulders. I waited for it to happen to me, but it wouldn't take. My body resisted success. I knew how other people saw me, even if they kept it to themselves. I'd never settle into any shape, unless that shape was dysfunction. My bloodline might be punctuated with brief flights overseas, but we always returned. Even to squalor, we were not adaptable enough to survive anywhere else. We needed apricot-hued sunlight and thick green olive oil to eat with foraged herbs, untainted by diasporic branding. The same genetic condition that made my grandparents hide old keys and bundles of faded, tissue-like documents under their mattress until the day they died. They placed the keys in my hands when I was younger. Ya bint al-Arab, they called me then, with soft eyes, as if witnessing something precious, an oracle. My fate was sealed. In many ways, I thought my parents heroic, fleeing but returning, so their children could grow up knowing what it is to belong in their homeland. They taught me to keep a war pantry, to care for my neighbors and elders, and face many kinds of conflict, but not how to prepare for a future beyond the end of the week. I didn't know how to name my culture when I first moved away, which is to say, I didn't know how to talk about my experience as if it were outside of my body, an object I could describe as if from a great distance. I let other people name it for me, partly out of fear. Sometimes that was fine. Other times, it felt like a map with borders I hadn't drawn myself, and I wondered if that feeling was my own unwieldiness, but it never did grow less. When I eventually decided to start naming things for myself, that was when many of my problems started. My mother's village was destroyed by the occupation, I said. Destroyed by God, they said. I said, the sea is soft and green. They said, the sea is rich and red. The conversations I had with colleagues felt like tests I couldn't pass. My manager advised me not to draw attention to my ethnicity. People won't assume you're anything if you keep your head down, she said. For much of my childhood, we filled water gallons from the Ain in a nearby village and poured them out into clear glass bottles. These were left in the sun to purify at my baba's insistence, even though the water was fresh and safe to drink. My sisters and I mixed in milk powder, tang or toot, to make it taste better. Mama gave us worming tablets from the UN clinic as a precaution. We never fell sick. When we moved into the middle class, after Baba found work overseas and went away, we could finally afford to buy gallons of Nestle water with the money he sent home, and thirst became less of a problem. In Europe, nobody seemed to worry about water. It wasn't so connected to everyday life as far as I could tell. It flowed into every house. You could drink it from every tap, and even trickled straight onto your toothbrush in the bathroom sink. There were no special instructions in the morning about where to line up if no Nestle trucks came from the city. Nobody looked in the tanks before switching on the boiler for a bath. I no longer knew anyone who cast nets from fishing boats, or who sold whitebait and shrimp to people sitting outside at cafes. People would buy fish at the supermarket, headless bodies wrapped in plastic, something I still find disturbing to this day. I forgot the faces of my childhood friends, but I will always remember the glass bottles in the sun, the funnel Mama used to carefully pour from the gallons, the water she saved to wash our fruit and vegetables. My parents' house lies off the main road in our village, theoretically only a couple of hours from the city. Theoretically, my country is small, but we busy ourselves with winding roads to nowhere and distinct microclimates. The roads and mountains make a mockery of theory. The caves in the mountains and under our feet are almost a separate country if you think about it, Baba said once. He kept cans of tuna and bottled water in our car in case of roadblocks, traffic jams, and other unpredictable holdups. We were all late bloomers because it took so long to arrive anywhere. This was as good an explanation as any for my constant feeling that I was never where I was supposed to be, rarely in step with people my own age. Occasionally, I would text Baba pictures of the better pages in my sketchbook. He would send back photorealistic drawings he had found on the internet, usually of fair-haired maidens clasping baskets of fruit and flowers. "Make art like this if you want a career," he wrote. but my study of water had become obsessive. Sometimes I even went to the beach in the early afternoon when the heat was merciless. Every day, without exception, I walked along the shore soon after sunrise, and again for a few hours in the long evenings. I began accepting remote assignments from my workplace overseas on an ad hoc basis. I needed the money, but after such a long break, I resented going back to scheduling meetings, using email jargon, and feeling the demand on my time, meager though it was. I daydreamed about shoals and turtles, the pufferfish I saw in the shallows, the much larger fish I saw once camouflaged at the base of the corals, seemingly made of rusted iron, which opened its terrifying eyes an inch from mine and darted away before I could even grasp its presence. Drawing all of those things felt important, but I concentrated most on waves, how not to make a caricature of their movement, their weight. One night, I backtracked home from the beach to retrieve my pencils, when a large family, parents, grandparents, a gang of children, appeared on the corner. Recent fighting in a nearby village had unsettled my neighbors. Almost everybody had left for the city by then. I heard the family's chatter and laughter echo through the empty street as I spied on them from where I crouched in the stairwell. It was almost 9 o'clock. The moon was rising, the sky still pale and bright. I'd seen hundreds of crabs wash up on the beach the night before. Not the usual hermit crabs, or steel-colored things with red-tipped pinchers that snap under your feet, but larger ones that seemed to appear out of nowhere. They were so serene, moving as one along the sandbanks under the moon. I meant to return to sketch them that evening, those newcomers, giants compared to the piddly ones I saw day to day, but upon seeing the family I changed my mind and went back inside. From my balcony, I watched the children running onto the beach as they beat the sand with large sticks. Small dark shapes scattered in the moonlight. Through hot tears, I reminded myself of how the new checkpoints along the coastal roads had tripled the cost of food. The adults scooped the battered crabs into plastic buckets, and when the children finished splashing around, they began to walk towards my house again, a joyful parade. It occurred to me that I could wave to them. They'd undoubtedly take me in and feed me. I could offer them fruit and macarons in return, but my instinct was to rush down to the water to see what had become of the crabs, to see if any were left. I couldn't decide what to do, and looked at the moon through glass. I fell asleep. I woke up in the very early morning to check in with my manager and found dozens of missed calls and messages from Baba instructing me to pack up the house and leave for the city as soon as possible. Armored vehicles had crossed over the border, and the occupation militia were moving from home to home. My memory filled in the blanks. Villagers frog-marched from their houses and forced into the square, orchards bursting into flames. I started throwing things into bags while trying to log into Zoom. I've been really patient, but you're putting me in a very difficult position here. I don't understand what you're trying to achieve, my manager said after I finally connected. I agreed with her that continuing to work remotely was impractical. They're destroying water trucks and flushing the sea into aquifers, and they're forcing everyone to leave, I blurted out, too quickly, immediately aware of how I came across. She closed her eyes for longer than a blink as her face slowly collapsed into pixels and jerked to the side and then righted itself again. We were stacked, awkwardly on the screen, along with the people and culture officer, freezing and unfreezing. All of our heads were flattened into boxes. Between glitches, I heard my manager say, "Look, we don't need to talk about the water," just before the electricity and internet cut out. The room went dark. I began to reread Baba's messages, counting my breaths until I could focus. Everything was still, empty. The early morning breeze, brushing the frangipani against the kitchen window pane, was barely the faintest whisper. I encountered Baba's instructions to myself and started to move more quickly. Lock the shutters, block the drains. I made my way to the switchboard. Turn off pump, turn off mains. Before locking the balcony, I emptied some of Mama's village soil onto a tea towel, tied it up with a scrunchie. Then I knelt near the front door and placed handfuls of earth from under our ancient grapevine into a plastic bag, suddenly having a flashback of my little sister riding her tiny bike around the yard, wearing her favorite red shoes and off-brand Finding Nemo pajamas. The keys felt so cold in my hand as I locked the stairwell gate behind me. The first rays of light, like a faint torch across the sea.
You're listening to All the Best on FBI Radio 94.5. I'm Gabriella Accaria. This story was originally commissioned by Debris magazine for issue 6. No, the co-editors were John Chia and Cher Tan, and the sound design was by Tala, Issaoui. You can find out more about Debris magazine in the show notes. And if you enjoyed listening to Alissar's story, then keep listening to All the Best for unique stories from independent audio makers from so-called Sydney and around the country. Definitely catch our live radio broadcast on Sundays at 9:30am on FBI Radio 94.5. We also release a brand new episode every Tuesday at 4pm on allthebestradio.com, Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Follow us now so you never miss an episode. All the Best is made at FBI Radio on Gadigal land, in association with SYN and 3RRR, on Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunwurrung lands, and 8CCC on Arrente and Mooramungu lands. Kwame Slusher is our production manager. Catarina Fraga Matos is our community and programming coordinator. The All the Best executive producer is Mel Bakewell. Patrick McKenzie writes our newsletter. And a special shout out to all of our amazing volunteers. Shining Bird composed our theme music, and Annie Hamilton designed the artwork. We're heard across Australia on the Community Radio Network. And we're made possible by the Art Gallery of New South Wales and the Community Broadcasting Foundation. You can find our full archive of almost 700 episodes at allthebestradio.com. I'm Gabriella Accaria. Thanks for listening.